we have Dr. Victor Cabrera, who is a professor of, excuse me, a professor and extension specialist in dairy management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Dairy Science Department. And Dr. Cabrera continues and combines applied research, interdisciplinary approaches, and participatory methods to determine practical, data-driven, user-friendly, and scientific decision support tools for dairy farms management. His research and extension programs have a global impact, and Dr. Cabrera has not only given extension talks in Wisconsin, but around the world. Dr. Cabrera and his work group have developed 50 decision support tools, published over 90 refereed articles and over 10 book chapters. And his work in the past 14 years has been pivotal to attracting over $5.5 million in support to his research and extension initiatives. And along with him today, we have Tadeau Silva, and he obtained his Bachelor of Science in Animal Science at the Federal University of Picosa MG out of Brazil, and his MS and PhDs in animal science at the same university. His MS and PhD projects were focused on ruminant nutrition and statistical modeling applied to animal production. Dr. Silva worked for Cargill Animal Nutrition from 2018 to 2021 as an application consultant, and his work has focused on data analysis, business intelligence, statistical modeling, and building applications to help customers make those data-driven decisions. Now he's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the labs of Dr. Jennifer Van Oss and Dr. Cabrera. And with that, I will yield the floor to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're very, very excited to share with you this new tool we are working with Tadeau that we are calling DairyPrint. And the main idea of this tool is helping dairy farmers towards improving sustainability, having higher sustainability. So you want to say hello, Tadeau?
Yeah, so I'm very excited to be here and presenting this tool we've been working, and yeah, to show you some of the features of this tool and how this tool can help you and to moving towards this higher sustainability. Yeah,
we are gonna be doing a truly co-presentation between Tadeau and myself. Very candid. We're gonna be talking one after the other and complementing each other as we go through the presentation. I think that's going to be a good way to share important information about this tool, what it can do, and how this can help the dairy industry. So this is the outline, and maybe you want to go through this, Tadeau?
Yeah, sure, Victor. So as you can see here, our idea is to show you briefly what we are calling the root problem, the problem we kind of are addressing, the motivations we had to create this tool, and also we are going to show you what is the main concept behind of this DairyPrint model. And also, I think the most exciting part of this presentation is to demonstrate to you some of the functionalities of this tool with some live simulations and playing with the tool, and show you how it's like easy to use the tool and how easy it is to create some kind of what if questions and respond them immediately. And by the end of the presentation, we just want to share with you some take-home messages we think are important to share with you.
So let's start with the root problem. Nestle very nicely mentioned about the greenhouse gas emissions being an issue, a challenge for the dairy industry, for agriculture in general. This affects the global climate. Global warming is a big concern. And you can see here a very nice diagram we took from IDF. And so maybe, Tadeau, you want to go a little more in detail about
what this diagram is telling us. Yeah, sure, Victor. So the idea of this diagram is just to show you that basically we have kind of three main greenhouse gas emission gas that are emitted in a farm or out of a farm, which are the CO2, mainly from anthropogenic activities, the methane. It could be from enteric methane or even from the manure handling and management, and nitrous oxide from the herd, from manure management, or even from crops. Also, we have actually one more gas, which is the ammonia, but ammonia is converted to nitrous. Part of it is converted to nitrous oxide, so we have to consider this with this range of possible greenhouse gas that are emitted in a farm. So basically, what we are going to say here is that we have these on-farm activities that produce those gases, which are related to the herd, to manure, to crops, but also, of course, we have some other potential sources which encompasses the dairy chain, like the fertilizer production or feed production. Feed production could be inside of the farm, fuel and electricity, or even processing all the products we have on a farm. Yeah, so that was the main idea of showing you this picture. This diagram. Yeah, and as Nestle mentioned as well, electricity could be part of this whole system that should be also considered when we do assessments of emissions at the farm level. Yeah. So it's very interesting to see, according to different kind of estimations, this has been revised throughout the years, but EPA in 2017, for example, just to pick one good source of information, puts agriculture at 8.4% of global source of carbon emissions. If we split or actually put what the dairy sector contribution is to this agriculture total, it's about, according to these calculations, 1.3%. So the first point we want to make here is that agriculture is not big in the whole picture compared to other industries, and dairy by itself is not also huge within the agricultural sector. Saying that, it doesn't mean we should not worry about it, because we know there is a lot of pressure in all the industries to try to do the best we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And as we all know, the dairy industry feels the pressure, and it is a big challenge to comply with that pressure. Yeah, Victor, it's a very nice point. I mean, we've been pressured, but we can see this also as an opportunity. Exactly. Right? And we've been talking about carbon credits. So if in this case, it can be part of the solution for all the environmental issues we are having. And we've seen some people having as a perspective to monetize the way that they reduce or they mitigate all these greenhouse gas emissions. So I think the bottom line is that we should see this as a great opportunity. Exactly. I completely agree. There is an opportunity here, and farmers, dairy farmers specifically, could be part of the solution. And along that way, they can capitalize on that contribution. So that's part of our motivation. And I mean, to be more specific, that motivation relies on the pressure to reduce environmental impact from dairy farms, obviously. But in order to do so, we all know if we don't measure, we cannot change anything. So we need to assess that environmental impact of dairy farms. And we need to try to use the best tools and science that we have behind to do that kind of quantification. We know the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions, it's very difficult, maybe in some cases even
impossible at the moment with the technology we have, if we want to be completely precise. However, there are good ways to calculate. Actually, it's not only very difficult to measure, but it could be extremely expensive as well if you want to measure. Maybe for research settings, it is being done, and probably we should continue doing that. But in order to assess at the commercial farm level, probably we want to use good models, good metrics that already exist. And those are based on mathematical models, right? And there are great models out there. Do you want to tell us some of those about those, Tadeau?
Yeah, for sure, Victor. So when we start this project, we were like looking at some at literature and out of some other tools to that used to they're supposedly to perform this kind of evaluation. And I mean, as Victor mentioned, there are so many good models with different levels of complexity or different approach to try to estimate this greenhouse gas emissions and other stuff actually. So yeah, so the point is that we have just some examples in these slides, but in general, we've seen that those models, they have some issues, and one of the main problems is that they require too many inputs to run. So to run any kind of these models, you have to collect lots of data. Sometimes, for some of them, actually, you have to have a maybe intensive training, or even you are not able to run it by yourself. You should have someone guiding you. And also, some of these models are truly research or education oriented. So for the people that are like in the field, it's hard to use this great models to make decisions. So yeah,
for practical purposes, they are not very useful indeed. We are part with Tadeau actually of this great initiative that's called RUFAS, the Ruminant Farm System Model. It's a large initiative with at least 5 universities involved, 3 research centers, and I don't know, between 40 and 50 researchers, which is a great initiative. And I think what's going to be coming, and it's still already coming, it's great. However, it does require lots of data in order to be able to use those models. Likely it's more in the realm of research system, and so they are not practical for day-to-day use and direct decision making from the practitioners in the field. So that's what we want to do here, and I think we have a good lead on achieving that. So here is a main diagram of the DairyPrint model. I know it has several components. We are not going to go to every single one here. That's not the idea. But the first thing I want to mention, this is a whole farm system with very specific characteristics. Like you see in the text there, first of all, high level. So the high level, the way we understand in this case is that we want to give a whole picture of a farm system on how it's performing in the least amount of output information as possible. So we want to give what's going on and allow also the user to see how this is changing as we make the strategic management change.
Yeah, and also we are developing this tool, this model actually to be simple to access it, simple to run it, and simple to just change some inputs and run it and get outcomes. Exactly. That's our idea of like being simple.
And the other thing we kept in mind, and we still keep greatly in mind as we develop this, it needs to be minimalistic. And we understand in this case to be minimalistic in the sense that we need to be very selective on those inputs and outputs that come into the model. I mean, we can put 100 or hundreds of different parameters there that may not have an important impact on what we are trying to estimate or display. So therefore, there are many of those we can do pre-analysis. We can do sensitivity analysis, which are the most important factors, and we pick only those key performance indicators to display and key variables in order to enter as parameters to run these models.
Great, Victor. And one more feature that we thought that about this model is to be robust. And robust in this case is meaning that the model produces meaningful outcomes, and also that capture the main interactions between variables, components in a dairy farm, producing these outcomes. And I mean, where we can report these and make decisions based on these outcomes.
I mentioned before that we are part, for example, of the RUFA. That's a large, full-blown model. So we have access to data and results and outcomes of that model, and we can compare with a more simpler, minimalistic model, and we can make sure our results are following the same trends and actually are in the ballpark. That's what we want. We don't want maybe the decimal accuracy, but we want the ballpark that allows farmers to make meaningful decisions on the farm. And it is also user-friendly, and in this case, it has to be, as you will see, hopefully, and you will appreciate, it needs to be 100% intuitive, and so give the confidence to anyone, whether it's the farmer or the farm manager or any practitioner, any extension professional, have the confidence to use the model and trust the results and understand and interpret the results in an easy, direct way. Yeah, so this is the main diagram. We have different components, and you will see those more in detail within the actual tool itself. So our next step actually is to move and to actually, we're gonna launch officially today the tool to show you. And so let me just move on here to the actual tool. So let me see if I can do this in a more efficient way. It's gonna work. Give it a second. Okay, here we're in the tool, and we're gonna reload the tool so you're gonna see exactly the same way.
Not sure if people are seeing.
I think people are seeing. Alisa, can you confirm that you are seeing the tool?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. We just wanted to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the front screen, or what we call the front end of the tool. And we try to make it, as Tadeau was mentioning, very intuitive and user-friendly. So would you give us an overview? Tadeau is the one who is developing all the code behind this tool.
Yeah, Victor. Yeah, just going to this left side and exploring this modules we've been adding there. So we have this herd calibration, which is the part where we set up the herd. Mm-hmm. So the user can put all the information regarding his herd and calibrate the model. We're going to explore this in more detail. The economics, the manure handling and management. So we have also the crops dashboard, which actually the crops, of course, it's gonna be something to simulate stuff, but in the dashboard part, we would summarize everything, giving a big picture of what is happening in terms of this greenhouse gas emissions, and also nutrient balances and etc. Economic analysis. And lastly, this about this tool, we are going to add some useful links, some documentation exactly about the tool. I mean, the idea is to have something that it's self-explanatory. Exactly. But of course, sometimes we need some help, and this is the place where we're going to put some help for the user
to dig for more information if they require.
Exactly. Yeah.
Taking advantage that we have the logo here of the Dairy Innovation Hub, we acknowledge the financial support they have provided to develop this model. We have a final slide as well of the talk mentioning that, but I just wanted to take the advantage of doing that at the moment. Okay, so here on the main panel of the tool, as we select on the menu on the left, we will have different model or modules or components of the big model. So let's start with the herd calibration. So as the name says, basically here is the part in which the user, the farmer, will come and define or portray the best he or she can, his or her own farm regarding to the herd. And that would be like the baseline component, the underlying component that will go across the other modules of the main tool. So, for example, on this first panel, we have the herd information, and we try to be, as I mentioned before, selective on those key variables that would be important for what we want to assess. Like, for example, the total cows. In this case, by default appears 150 cows. Let's say, for example, it's about average herd in Wisconsin with 150 cows having a calving interval of 15 months. Every number here is changeable, editable. The cow cooling rate, we can assume is 35%, the first calving at 24 months. And you can look at the rest of the numbers here as default, but every farm will be different, as we know, and these numbers should be changed. Like, for example, here we're assuming it's a Holstein herd with about 680 kilos per cow when they are in mature age. Yes, and so we can follow here.
Yeah, and in this part, this the write-off, we have the calf feed management and milk compositions, where it's basically all the information we need to populate the model about the calves and milk composition. Where, for example, this birth weight, we decided to put it here, and it connects with the mature weight. So the user can change these values if he has some, like, let's say, heavier cows. The amount of milk supplied to the calves, the milk protein and milk fat content, and also the starter composition. All these variables are important to be connected, or even with the growth rate of these animals, with for the nutrient balances, and etc. in the model.
So in the same fashion, for example, in this next part, we can define the diet information for what we consider three most important groups of animals on the herd. The lactating cows on the left here, in the middle, the dry cows, and on the right, the heifers. I mean, and this is, as I mentioned before, one compromise we needed to do in order to keep this simple and still robust. We could put more diets for more groups, but I think trying and using data from research, we were able to feel comfortable that this would be enough to get a good estimate of what we want to have regarding to the economics, and more importantly, to the emissions of greenhouse gases emissions and other nutrients balances on the herd. So at this point, and this should be filled just by recollection of the information probably the farmer or the farm manager will have in his or her head, no need even to get to the records to come up with this information. And at this point, he or she would be able to just hit this button here that says run, and it will take only a few seconds. And all the information that has been run is in the background. It will present at the beginning here, for example, when the herd is stable, there will be an approximated 134 milking cows, 16 dry cows. There will be about 100 heifers and 9 calves. And other important thing is that it will estimate the stability of the herd.
Yeah. In this case, we just displaying how many calves born monthly in these male calves, female calves, sorry, and monthly, and how much is basically required to replace in the herd. So we are showing the balance of what is produced and what is required to keep the herd in equilibrium. Yeah,
exactly. And actually, we can take a closer look to what's going on with the herd as we simulated. And so let's increase this panel, and we can see this in more detail. Like, for example, the performance metrics of the herd, which is very interesting. All this has been calculated based on the data we enter. Like, for example, on top here, we can see in these 3 columns, the dry matter intake. This is for the heifers, the one I'm pointing out. This is for the dry cows, and this is for the milking cows. If you remember, we put 40 kilos of production, and the milking cows are requiring about 24 kilos of dry matter intake. So if we look down here, you want to go to this?
Yeah, we have the milk yield, and we're showing this number. You probably realize that it's a bit different of what the number we fed the tool. We put there 40 kilos, but in this case we're running an optimization process in which we're trying to calibrate the model to achieve as much as possible the value that was entered for the user to what is being actually simulated.
Yeah, so the number we entered at the beginning, that was the input, and this is an output. And I mean, the important point is that the model, the way Tadeau did, and there is an optimization behind, it's very close, the simulated from the enter value.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's some way to validate that the model
Exactly.
is behaving as it should.
Also, we have this part, the milk yield corrected for 4% of fat and 3.3 of protein. So we can see that the number is a bit lower, but if the user changes this number and in the inputs part, this value will change, of course.
And this number is used to calculate the feed efficiency, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the feed efficiency in this case is calculated by using the milk yield corrected by fat and protein.
And so it's very interesting as well to see the curves behind here on the graph of the left. We have the expected lactation curves for first lactation in red, second and later lactations, as you see here. And on the right, the dry matter intake that would be expected. And the x-axis, we have the months in lactation and the values on the y-axis, right? As we expect, dry matter intake would be lower for first lactation, followed by second lactation, and later lactation would have a higher dry matter intake.
Perfect. And something interesting to mention, Victor, here is that all these curves, they were customized for Wisconsin. So they represent lactation curves for coniferous, secondiferous, or multiferous cows for the state. We use data
from Wisconsin to parameterize these lactation curves. Obviously, the user has the chance to change the the absolute values of these curves, but they are in many ways representing what's going on in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So let's move on now to the next step here of the manure excretion and greenhouse gas emissions. So on the top cards here, we have the excretion of manure, whether it's for heifers on the left, on the middle for dry cows, and milking cows on the right. So you can directly and quickly say, oh, my milking cows may be producing about 72 kilos of manure every single day. And then we have here.
Yeah, we have also here the methane emissions for each category. So this is the average emission for each animal. So we can see the emissions for heifers, enteric methane for heifers, dry cows and milking cows. Something that I think it's important to emphasize here is that you could think, oh, there is one more greenhouse gas that is emitted from the enteric fermentation, which is the nitrous oxide. But we decided to not show the numbers because they are very low, very small. So in this page, we just have methane, which is the biggest.
The most important one.
Exactly.
Still, we are calculating that value and it is internally tracked.
Mm-hmm.
And in this figure here, we have how the evolution through the lactation is of the manure excretion and the methane emissions for different lactations. Right? So these are heavily related, as you would recall from the previous figures, with both the milk lactation curves, but probably more related to the dry matter intake curves from previously. And we are using the state-of-the-art, the latest equations to make these assessments, and we have tested that these values are within what we heavily expected. So let's move on to the nutrient excretion. Here we have a lot of additional data out of the model. And here this data, if you take a closer look, is related to these three main nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And each one of these cards will have different emissions, or if we call negative balance of or emissions of nitrogen on top for heifers, dry cows, and milking cows. And the same we have in the middle for phosphorus and then for potassium. And below we have the evolution of these across the lactation. Anything you want to mention about these curves? I mean, they're very interesting to see how it changed across the lactation.
Yes, but they will respond. The main driver, Victor, as we can see here, is the dry matter intake, as you mentioned. So
exactly,
they will follow this pattern over the lactation, which is and the dry matter intake is also driven by the milk yield, right? So everything is connected,
heavily connected, and we tried and we will keep trying as we move on in the development of this tool to capture the best we can these interactions.
Exactly.
So we have a lot of data here. You can see estimated based on very key input parameters. So let me now go back here to the main tool menu and look at the next tab, that is the economics. And in this part, we are calculating basically what's the most important economic indicator in dairy farms, which is the milk income over feed cost, right? So first of all, on top here in this section or panel, we define the cost of the feed for different groups of animals and the milk price. And then in the bottom here,
Yeah. Yeah, in the bottom, we can see the total milk income per cow, the feed cost per cow, the income over feed cost per lactating cow, but also including the dry cows, the income over feed cost just for the dry cows, and the feed cost per kilo of milk. Yeah,
being produced.
exactly. Something that I think it's worth to mention here is that this is a work in progress. So, I mean, this is not like the final product of this
Exactly.
economic part. So, but we are kind of demonstrating all the possibilities of with this kind of tool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now we can move on to the manure handling. And here, which is very interesting, in my opinion, is we can start what we promise to play with potential management strategies and actually recollect or assess what the impact would be with regards to emissions. So, but before we do that, first of all, I would like to point out to these numbers that appear here in the key performance indicators. So if you follow my mouse here, we have 28,600 kilos per year of total herd methane emissions. And this will come mostly from the enteric methane production. And even though there are opportunities to decrease that with either changing diets or providing some feed additives, there is a lot of research going on that. And we will include that in further versions of the tool. We're going to concentrate now on the other parts and mostly on the storage of the manure. We have two other components here. One is the barn methane emissions, but if you see the number here, 357, it's much slower compared to the other two ones. And we have here the total storage methane emission. That's another big component of methane emission on the farm of 25,700 kilos during a year. And we're gonna try to look at this number as we go through a series of case management strategies.
Yeah, Vic, I think it's worth to mention as well, these two graphs
Exactly.
that are displayed here. In the left side, we have the emissions from the barns. You can see two curves, a red one and a blue one. The red one represents the mean temperature for, in this case, if you look at the inputs for the Dane County for the last 20 years. So this is the
county.
Yeah, exactly. This is the mean temperature over the year. And the blue one is the emission, methane emission during the year. So we can see this behavior, like the temperature is the main driver for the emissions from the barns.
And on the right,
yeah, and on the right, we have the same idea, but now in this case, it's for the manure storage. So the same, we have the temperature in red, and in blue, we have the methane emissions during the year. So yeah, we still have this.
and there is a clear here
unusual
change.
change, but I mean, Victor is going to explore this with you.
And
yeah,
that
showing why
actually,
did that happened.
I can mention quickly here why this is happening here, because by default, the emptying time of this manure storage, it's happening in the fall time. And so that decreased the emissions during that time and then continues throughout the year. Okay. So the other thing quickly to point out here, I guess, Tadeau, is the scale, right? The values here. You can see here the daily methane emission from the storage compared with the emissions from the barn. The emissions from the barn are much, much lower than the emissions from the storage. So potentially the opportunity to decrease is much more concentrated in the storage. So as Tadeau mentioned, we can select here what county of Wisconsin we are. This tool has been developed with Wisconsin dairy farms in mind. We have put all the counties here of Wisconsin, so the user can select the county, and that will bring the weather information that's needed to calculate and make the assessments. So the first thing is, after that, is the facility. I mean, we can have a freestall or tie stall that are the most common facilities type in Wisconsin. And we assume it's a freestall, but we can test what it would be. We know that that's not an option easy to do on a farm to change from one to the other, but we can just test what it would be if we look at this number 25,711 and we change to tie stalls. We can see that number would not change. Indeed, the one that changed is the barn facility is 219, so it's much lower than what it was. With free stalls, that was 357. But in the big scale, it's not a big change in the methane emission.
Yeah, that's true, Victor. Yeah, I think we should move faster, but something that I would like to comment is that in this case, different from the hard calibration, the model responds immediately. You don't need to click or hit any button here.
Yeah, it's calculating and on the fly.
Exactly, yeah.
So now we have in this farm chopped straw as the bedding time. And now we can concentrate on this number, 25,711. So let's see how this number would change if we put, instead of bedding, chopped straw, we do sun. And this number will decrease by 7,000. So that's a big deal. If we do that change and we are willing to do that, we will decrease substantially our emissions. Now, if we put a biodigester, we will decrease, but let's leave it this for a moment. Let's start with the
you're right, yeah.
with the solid liquid.
No, with the biodigest, yeah, I think it's good idea.
We tried this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put the biodigester now then. From no to yes, we're gonna install a biodigester. We know that requires a good level of investment, but let's see what's the impact of doing that. If you put yes here, you see the number here has decreased quite a bit. So that's a very substantial decrease. And then actually our biodigester efficiency is 25 here. And we know by the literature, this could be as much as 40% of efficiency. And if we put 40%, our numbers would be even better.
Yeah.
So now that we have done that, we can actually implement.
Actually, in general, when you have like a digester, you have to have this solid liquid separation. So you decrease even more the methane emissions.
So if you remember, we started this number with 27,000. Now we have 6,000. So it's more than 4 times less than at the beginning, right? So we have decreased quite a bit. The manure, we're gonna leave it in a slurry for now, okay? But we can, the other thing we can change here, as you can see, the methane is being increased because we are emptying the manure only once a year and only in fall. So let's try first, instead of emptying the manure storage in fall, let's do it in the spring. And if we do it in spring, you see we decrease almost to half what it was before. So maybe a better strategy is to empty in spring rather than in fall, the manure storage. But probably the best option would be to empty in spring and fall, both times of the year. And then our decrease, it would be much higher. So this is important because now we know there are some possibilities in which we can decrease very substantially, tenfold or even more, our greenhouse gas emissions only on the part of the manure storage. We haven't even touched the herd enteric methane emission. So there are opportunities. And indeed, one thing we haven't tested, and we can put it here, is we can enclose the manure storage. And that will have a very high impact as well. If farmers can do only this, indeed, that will have a high impact on the manure storage. So we can decrease what it would be like single digits compared to the very beginning of the manure. So that's a big deal. Our time is running fast, but we hope you get at least a taste, a feeling of the tool, soon to be released, but in the works right now, but very close to be released. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation here, and let's move on to the next slide, to the take-home messages. So let me start with the first one here, assessing the environmental impact of dairy farms using this, our DairyPrint model, I think will be much easier and still robust and effective. So I think that's the goal we started with. I think that's what we're gonna be able to deliver and provide to the industry in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and some kind of considerations about this mitigation in this greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, we have lots of options. So we may improve the feed efficiency, manipulate diets, as Victor showed, by using different bedding types, installing a biodigester. I mean, there are so many ways to reduce this, and with this tool, everything we see that it's going to be much easier. So in our simulations, we focus on methane. Of course, the dynamic of this is the dynamics are more complex because we have other potential greenhouse gas emissions, and I mean there are some interactions that we haven't showed in this presentation. But we hope that with this tool, we can not just see bullet points in a text, but also see how the numbers, they change.
Actually, on my farm.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the main point.
So stay tuned. This is going to be available in the dairy management website that I happen to run. And we will have additional components. As you have seen, they are readily prepared, crops, full balances of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and trade-offs between environmental and economic outcomes, which we think are very interesting and important for the dairy industry in Wisconsin and everywhere. And we just want to finish up with acknowledgments and our source of funding, Dairy Innovation Hub. We're very, very thankful to that. And with that, we will be very glad to entertain questions and comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One of the first questions that we wanted to get addressed is this tool just for Wisconsin farms currently, as you presented it?
That's correct. Yes, it has been designed and it will be released for Wisconsin as primary audience. And that was the intent, and the Dairy Innovation Hub funding source agreement was as that. Yes.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. The reason I asked that because we did have a question before it had come in before you had got into the pulling down to the county level data about was there capacity to look at a farm in Wisconsin versus a farm in Florida to kind of see, like, are there going to be differences in the results just based on regional or climatic effects? And if it's a Wisconsin tool, then we're not going to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but something interesting to mention is that for sure, as we were seeing, the difference will be great, mainly for those outcomes that depends on, for example, the temperature. So yeah, in manure storage or even in the barns. Yeah.
Okay. So then we also had another question. There was a question about, if this tool is being geared towards farms being able to utilize this as helping them tell their carbon story, that sort of thing. We know that the majority of the world is reporting things in the metric system, degrees Celsius, kilograms, that sort of thing. But we're in Wisconsin, and the majority of farmers are utilizing, pounds and Fahrenheit. Are you looking at having a convertible interface so that people hopefully don't make the error of entering something in pounds instead of kilograms, and then that messes with all the end data, because that is a concern that we would have as is.
That's a very great point, Lisa, and whoever asked or commented on that. We have thought about that because we want to make the tool very robust. We want to compare and validate as we move throughout the development. And so probably our release would be not even with the conversion rates, but fully on the US or Wisconsin metrics. So we're gonna measure milk in hundredweights, and we're gonna measure pounds, and we're gonna have Fahrenheit as a temperature, as we know that's it's been used in the field. Yeah.
This is our last step.
But we want to keep it in metric system, because that's the way in which we can compare with the results and make sure our outcomes are within expected.
Yeah.
Right. And as you're comparing things across the scientific literature, that's really important to stay within that metric system. Great. So we had one last question, and as we're getting this question answered, if you haven't already had a chance to answer our questions on our evaluation poll, please take a minute to do so. There was a question that came through about what about compost or compost pack in barns that have that manure management system. What about those systems?
Composting. Yeah, manure, as we were saying, manure is it's a very challenging part to develop. I think we didn't think about this at the beginning, and we have so many options in terms of management practices. And yeah, for sure, we are for with the new developments we're going to release. We are considering to add the composting as well. So it's something that we are still working on. But very nice question.
Okay, well, I think maybe there was another question that came in after this. There was one last question. What are the differences in this tool compared to like the things that are being measured in the SNAP Plus nutrient management tool that we know is kind of a regulatory kind of helping make sure that we're putting on nutrients to the field where they're necessary? What's the big difference between your tool and that one?
I mean, I think there are several differences. First of all, I would emphasize the fact that we are trying to do a very simple and very intuitive tool. I have tried to use personally SNAP Plus, and it is relatively cumbersome to come up with all the data and interpret all the results once they come. So for once, that I think it provides a different way to look at your data at the farm level. You can see readily available your performance right away. I don't think this will preclude to use other tools. As we have mentioned during the presentation, we have and we will have even more involved and sophisticated tools. I don't think what we're trying to do here is replace them, but I think to provide some complementary source of information more readily available at the farm level.
Thank you. And I think that was our last question. So we'd like to say one more time, if you haven't had a chance to fill out that evaluation, please do so. And I think that about wraps up our Badger Dairy Insight for the day. Do you plan on coming back in next week for our next Badger Dairy Insight, the milk quality and production opportunities and threats? Same time, 1 to 2:30 p.m. You can register for that at go.wisc.edu/BDI 2023.
Thank you.
Mhm.